Few years ago, Bonelab was something of a holy grail for VR enthusiasts. After the success of Boneworks, who had innovative design and quite a lengthy campaign, though mostly because people took way longer to complete it at first than the devs expected. Unlike what the graffiti on the wall says, this didn't really feel like a tech demo, and so people waited with bated breaths for the next installment from the developers, Stress Level 0, of what was at the time known as Project 4. Most people were expecting the same caliber of game, and the hype was getting real in 2022. You could say in hindsight that they stated that the campaign would be a sideshow to the main focus of the sandbox, but increasing leaks and sneak peeks only made the hype grow. All the YouTubers were hyping it up in the summer, not naming any names, and in September they just dropped this. Everyone was ecstatic, the stage was set, everyone was getting ready, myself included, and we were just about to get a rude awakening. On September 29th that year, I returned from high school and I immediately bought the game, and I was very excited to play it. Big mistake. At first, everything seemed to be fine, but the first thing that bothered me was the massive amounts of bloom. It just made the image quality look muddier. It had its place, like in this pool, where it fit the atmosphere, and the ray reflections were stunning when looking at the whiteboards, though very taxing on the GPU, and so for the frame rates. But in places like the lab, the main hub, it just felt like I got the Quest version instead of the PCVR one. I mean, what is this? Some live concert event? It just went against that sharp and gritty feel of the original game, and this is the recurring problem of this game. Bonelab failed to carry on the good atmosphere and the immersion of Boneworks, suffering from a myriad of problems that all come back to this point. What's more, even Arthur Ford came back just to get smoothed out. Someone in the comment section actually pointed out how the null bodies got their outside wireframes and their entire faces removed. I know the last one is to improve performance, but these small changes pile up and lead to an overall disjointed world. Everything would have been fine if the campaign wasn't so incredibly short and condensed. Even from the beginning, the maps were so much smaller, like a miniature, and this part specifically, oh man, the frustration that was building up inside of me because of this annoying puzzle in this level, combined with the loud music and especially vocals, was not hitting well at all. And frustration is also a theme, because while Boneworks was confusing, it always gave you different ways to solve a problem. The design was open-ended, where here it's painfully linear. You start to think, how do the developers want me to solve this instead of how can I solve this? It gets a bit better with a John Wick style shootout in a set of corridors, and you get to use a new shotgun. But the real crux of the issue becomes apparent once you reach Jimmy. If before the pacing of the game was ruined by the lab, where you were supposed to do some sandbox levels and then use a crane that nobody understood, now you reach the meat of the game, where you unlock other avatars, the main advertised feature of this game. Every level is completely disconnected. You may say, that was the point, Impaler. It's the Lava Gang teaching you in their flushed levels. But that is no excuse to make such small, lifeless, boring and frustrating levels in that order. It starts pretty well with Street Puncher, but it keeps getting worse and worse each level until you reach Tower that makes you want to take off your headset and rest finally unable to gaslight yourself into thinking that you enjoyed playing this. When you do get back on track and the game starts to pick up again, coming back into levels that give you a bit of choice, player freedom and fun to play around with your new avatars, you actually start getting excited and done. It ended. That's all. Get off the ride. I have to admit I actually liked this last part, but it was only 1 hour or so, and couple that with the 1 to 2 hours at the start that I actually consider real content of substance, you know, a real campaign. They could have copied the formula of the first game and just doubled the length of it, and I would have absolutely eaten it up. But no, in 3 entire years, what did they do? They worked on refining the mechanics, you say? Well, let's see. Supposedly, the focus was on the sandbox and the avatar system where you can change your character on the fly, and that required some major overhauls for the player model so it doesn't have any gaps. Your model had gaps? I hear you say? Well, get ready to get the same level of mind blown as when you learned that Santa isn't real, so skip forward a bit if you don't want me to break that illusion. In Boneworks, Ford doesn't look like this. He actually looks like, and drum rolls please, this. Yes, I know. I was shocked too when I saw it too. Of course, I then tried to see if it was true, and sure enough, there your hand collides with your wrist, but not between your torso and wrist. I rest my case. That would make us far more similar to omniprojectors in how we function mechanically, rather than to null bodies or Fords that we meet funnily enough. Getting back to the subject, when you are climbing, your legs, or rather your ball, is hanging straight down, and you could raise your feet up or down with your right thumbstick. It took some getting used to, but just like the super jump, it was very reliable, and you simply had to reach your hands out onto a ledge, pull up your legs and hurl yourself over. In Bonelab, you are supposed to just throw yourself over, and the game will give you some lift automatically, both when jumping and when climbing over obstacles. But most of the time you will just bump awkwardly into the wall because you can't decide which stance you take. In fact, you can't even crouch down physically like you can in Boneworks, because now both standing and seated mode are active at the same time for the sake of driving, apparently, so it just pulls you back up when you want to stand down. Plus, your feet look silly when you run now, and I often find that because I had to use the thumbstick to stand up, I am now running on my heels, or I don't really know why I'm always on my heels, which is weird. All of this gives way more disconnect with my body than when I played the previous game. On the other hand, the arms were accurately tracked with all the different avatars, though I couldn't reach my weapon slots or my body log on some of the larger ones like heavy or tall because of my tracking rings on my Quest 2 controllers, and that is an issue. But I had fun using them in the last levels though. My sense of reality was getting warped with the constant change of world scale, and when I beat it and I took off my headset, I was looking at my hands like, why do they look weird now? Not that I didn't like it. Melee is also something that I think they actually improved upon, though some people say that it's easier now, but honestly, the melee in Boneworks, apart from knives, was pretty bad, but now it's way more fun and your hits actually feel like they have more weight and punch, or whatever you want to call it, and they stun your targets a bit more, though I'm not sure if that's really true. Guns are still the same with a few new ones that are still good additions. Personally, I really love this modded PPSH with a drum mag, though it's not in the base game, so all in all, there were some improvements and there were some downfalls. I just know that for all the experimentation, the immersion in my experience was worse. I didn't really feel like I could use my body one for one the same way as in Boneworks. At this point, just take a shot every time I say Boneworks. I think it's actually 8 times by now that it's appeared when I search in my script. Now, I can gloss over the fact that this game has a lot more focus on community content. Or does it? Not to say that there aren't a lot of good mods out there, and big ones like Fusion that brings multiplayer, and Labworks that ports the old Boneworks campaign over to Bonelab, which is pretty impressive. But how did this have better tools when, from what I gather, they still didn't release any SDK to support script mods, and you don't have a Steam workshop, it's still just downloading it by yourself. What, you get one small arcade that lets you access it from in-game instead of having a different UI made by modders? How is that much different, huh? All of this meaning we mainly get avatars and weapons, not really custom maps. They said that it was a work in progress and they wanted us to have access throughout this development, so we grow alongside it. But then they just shared a few mods on social media, said how it's great, then went completely radio silent, except one update that gave the campaign a few secret rooms. But at least the music was great. Just like in the previous video, Michael Wyckoff has done a wonderful job once again making the music for this game. It's just that the levels weren't really inspiring enough by themselves to make a lasting memory most of the time. The ending still managed to get me emotional with the Welcome Home and Don't Fence Me In songs playing while Jimmy comes pick you up and drives you back to the main menu in his void taxi. I think it's mainly the appeal to freedom that moved me so much. I'm really vulnerable to that. I don't mean to rag on this game because I like to. I'm disappointed that this is what they came up with when I know they are capable of doing a much better job. It feels more like a cash grab, honestly, with how disingenuous they were, and while I still look forward to the next one, I will wait for reviews because I kind of feel burned. I don't blame you for buying it though, just like how I bought it, especially if you are on standalone, because I know quite a lot of you watching find yourself without a VR ready PC, and in that case I would recommend you try the Labworks mod to play the Boneworks campaign on the Quest 2 standalone. And shout out to Buzzco for actually telling me in the comments section that the download speed is pretty slow, so you are actually better off using any laptop or cheap PC you may have to download the files and then use Sideloader to transfer them over to your Quest. But why should you play Boneworks and why was it so good? Well, click on this video right here and see why.